The Christmas lights blinked cheerfully on my mantel as I carried the heavy box of decorations upstairs. At 74, my knees protested every step, but I'd been decorating this house for 40 years and wasn't about to stop now. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step a reminder of my age and stubbornness. Calvin waited at the top landing, his face twisted with that familiar impatience that had grown worse since his mother died 5 years ago. "You're taking forever, old man," he muttered, stepping closer as I reached the final steps. His breath smelled of alcohol and resentment. Then his hand pressed hard against my shoulder, and suddenly I was tumbling backward, my hip cracking against the wooden stairs, Christmas ornaments exploding around me like broken dreams. Pain shot through my spine like lightning, and my glasses flew off, clattering somewhere in the darkness below. Through the agony that consumed my body, I heard his voice from above, cold and calculated. "Maybe now you'll listen. Rewrite your will, Dad. Make this easy for both of us." That's when I knew this wasn't an accident. This was war. The paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher while Calvin played his role perfectly, wringing his hands and telling the neighbors how I'd just lost my footing. Mrs. Henderson from next door stood on her porch in her bathrobe, shaking her head sadly at the sight of the old man who couldn't handle stairs anymore. My hip screamed with every movement, and blood trickled from a gash on my forehead where I'd hit the banister. The metallic taste filled my mouth, mixing with the bitter realization of my son's betrayal. But through the haze of pain medication, I watched Calvin's performance with crystal clarity. He rode with me in the ambulance, patting my hand while whispering about getting my affairs in order and how accidents like this proved I couldn't live alone anymore. The paramedic, a young woman with kind eyes, kept checking my blood pressure, which spiked every time Calvin opened his mouth. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a fractured hip, 3 bruised ribs, and a mild concussion. Calvin immediately started asking about my mental state, whether I'd be competent to make decisions. The doctor looked puzzled by his eagerness, but I squeezed my eyes shut and started planning. If Calvin wanted to play games, I'd give him a match he'd never forget. My daughter Rebecca rushed into the hospital room, her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from her double shift at the pediatric ward. Her eyes were red with tears as she examined my injuries with the professional concern that made her such a good nurse. "Dad, what happened?" "Calvin said you fell, but these bruises look like." Calvin cut her off smoothly, his hand on her shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive but felt controlling to anyone who knew his manipulative nature. "Becky, don't upset him with questions." The doctor said his memory might be fuzzy from the concussion. I watched him manipulate my own daughter with surgical precision, and rage burned in my chest hotter than any physical pain. His voice carried that practiced tone he'd perfected over the years, the one that made reasonable people doubt their own instincts. When Rebecca stepped out to talk with the nurses about my care plan, Calvin leaned close to my bed rail, his cologne mixing with the antiseptic hospital smell. "I've got everything ready, Dad. Legal papers, power of attorney, a nice care facility picked out. All you have to do is sign." His breath smelled of coffee and arrogance, and his eyes held the cold calculation of someone counting money that wasn't his yet. I turned my head away, pretending weakness while my mind sharpened like a blade. Two could play this game, and I had 40 years of teaching strategy to stubborn teenagers on my side. The lawyer Calvin brought looked like he'd graduated last week, all nervous energy and cheap cologne that couldn't mask the smell of desperation. His hands shook slightly as he spread papers across my hospital bed table while Calvin hovered like a vulture, explaining how these documents would protect my interests and ensure my care. The young man stammered through legal jargon about power of attorney and asset transfers, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation, but probably needing the money too badly to ask questions. I could see the doubt in his eyes, the way he avoided looking directly at me while explaining how I was signing away my rights. My hands shook as I picked up the pen, but not from weakness. It was pure fury disguised as infirmity, a rage so deep it made my fingers tremble with the effort of containing it. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, making sure every letter was clear and readable. What Calvin didn't know was that I was signing Mickey Mouse in my most careful handwriting, and these papers would be worthless the moment anyone looked closely. The lawyer packed up quickly, avoiding eye contact, probably knowing something wasn't right, but too scared of Calvin to speak up. As they left, Calvin squeezed my shoulder hard enough to bruise. "Smart choice, old man. You'll thank me later." I smiled weakly and began counting down the days until his world collapsed around him. Rebecca helped me home from the hospital 3 days later, my new walker clicking against the front steps I'd built with my own hands 40 years ago. The sound echoed off the brick walls like a drumbeat, announcing my return to what had once been my sanctuary. Calvin had already moved into my master bedroom, claiming the main floor was safer for someone with my condition. My clothes were packed in garbage bags in the guest room like I was some transient he was grudgingly housing, and my medications were locked in a cabinet only he could access. "For your own safety," he explained to Rebecca, who frowned but didn't argue, probably thinking he was being responsible rather than controlling. The guest room felt like a prison cell, narrow and cold, nothing like the master bedroom Martha and I had shared for decades. That first night, I lay in the narrow bed listening to Calvin rummaging through my desk drawers in the study below. Every creak of the floorboard told me he was searching for bank statements, insurance policies, anything valuable he might have missed in his initial inventory. I could hear him muttering to himself, cursing when he couldn't find what he was looking for. But my most important documents were already hidden somewhere he'd never think to look. Inside the false bottom of my old toolbox in the basement, wrapped in plastic like treasure. Let him search until his fingers bled. Tomorrow, I'd start building the trap that would catch him. The next morning brought unexpected visitors that made Calvin's face go white as fresh snow. 2 men in dark suits introduced themselves as investigators from Elder Protective Services, following up on an anonymous tip about my fall. Their badges glinted in the morning sunlight streaming through my kitchen window, and their eyes were sharp with professional suspicion. Calvin's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, then practiced concern. But he recovered quickly, ushering them into the living room with coffee and concerned explanations about my declining health. I played my part perfectly, acting confused and frail while listening to every word they spoke. The investigators asked careful questions about my injuries, my living situation, my relationship with Calvin, their voices gentle but probing. I gave vague answers, claiming memory problems from the concussion, but I watched their faces carefully. They weren't convinced by Calvin's performance, I could tell. Their trained eyes took in details he didn't even know they were seeing. The locks on the medicine cabinet, the way he positioned himself between me and them, the subtle signs of control masquerading as care. After they left, Calvin paced the living room like a caged animal, his composure finally cracking. "Who called them? Was it Rebecca?" "I swear, Dad, if you've been telling stories." I just shrugged helplessly, letting him think I was too addled to plan anything. But inside, I was already 3 moves ahead. The investigators had given me their card, and I'd palmed it while Calvin wasn't looking. Help was just a phone call away when I was ready to make my move. Calvin's true nature emerged like a snake shedding its skin, revealing something ugly and dangerous underneath. He started small, criticizing my eating habits and demanding I ask permission before using the phone like I was a child who couldn't be trusted. "You're not thinking clearly, Dad. Let me handle the important stuff." His voice carried the patronizing tone of someone who enjoyed having power over others. He intercepted my mail, claiming he was helping manage my bills, but I saw him pocketing cash that came in Christmas cards from old students who still remembered their favorite math teacher. When Rebecca visited, he became the dutiful son again, bringing me tea and fluffing my pillows while talking about my good days and bad days, like I was some senile patient he was nobly caring for. But the moment she left, the mask dropped completely. He'd snatched the remote from my hands, changed the thermostat to save money on his heating bills, and lecture me about being grateful for his sacrifice in taking care of me. The final straw came when he threw away my photo of his mother, claiming it was unhealthy to live in the past, while he carried it to the garbage like it was contaminated waste. I watched him toss Martha's picture in with yesterday's newspapers, and something cold and final settled in my chest. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, desecrated something sacred. War was no longer coming. War was here, and I intended to win it. I called my old friend Harold, who'd retired from the police force, but still had connections throughout the law enforcement community. "Dan, you sure about this?" he asked after I explained the situation, his voice carrying decades of experience with family violence cases. "These cases are tricky. Without proof, it's your word against his, and courts tend to be skeptical of elderly accusations against caregivers. I assured him I understood the legal challenges, but asked for advice anyway, knowing his expertise could guide my strategy. Harold was quiet for a long moment before speaking, probably thinking about all the cases he'd seen where families turned predatory. You need evidence. Recordings, witnesses, documentation. And Dan, be careful. If Calvin's desperate enough to push you downstairs, he might be desperate enough for worse. That afternoon, I called a security company, claiming I needed a system installed for my peace of mind after the accident. Calvin actually approved the idea, thinking it would keep intruders out while he was away. He had no idea it would keep his crimes in, recorded in digital clarity for prosecutors to review. The installer, a sharp young woman named Maria, understood immediately when I explained what I really needed. Motion-activated cameras in every common area, she confirmed quietly, her voice professional but sympathetic. And yes, sir, the recordings go to a secure cloud server he can't access or delete. For the first time since my fall, I felt hope stirring in my chest like a flame catching tinder. The cameras went live on a Tuesday morning, invisible eyes watching every corner of my home like guardian angels made of silicon and steel. Calvin strutted around the house that day, making phone calls about my property and researching care facilities with bars on the windows and locks on the doors. I pretended to nap in my recliner while actually listening to every word he spoke, cataloging each piece of evidence for future use. He called my insurance company, asking about policies and payouts, his voice taking on that smooth professional tone he used when money was involved. He contacted my bank, trying to access accounts I'd never authorized him touch, frustrated when they demanded documentation he didn't have. Each call was another nail in his own coffin, and he was swinging the hammer himself with enthusiastic incompetence. That evening, he brought dinner to my chair with exaggerated kindness, knowing Rebecca was coming by later for her weekly visit. "Here you go, Dad. Your favorite soup," he said loudly enough for any listening devices to hear. But when I reached for the spoon with trembling fingers, he grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave marks, his grip like a vice closing on old bones. "Don't embarrass me tonight," he hissed, his mask slipping just enough to reveal the monster underneath. "Rebecca's been asking too many questions. Keep your mouth shut or you'll regret it more than you already do." The camera above the fireplace recorded every word, every threatening gesture, every moment of his casual cruelty. I smiled at him like a confused old man, but inside I was celebrating. He was building my case better than any lawyer could. Rebecca arrived with homemade cookies and suspicion in her eyes, the kind of professional wariness that comes from years of working with vulnerable patients. She'd been a nurse for 15 years and knew the signs of abuse when she saw them, could read the subtle indicators that others missed. "Dad, those bruises on your wrists are new," she said quietly while Calvin was in the kitchen, ostensibly preparing coffee, but probably listening to every word. "And you seem scared, Jumpy. What's really happening here?" Her voice carried the gentle authority she used with frightened children in the hospital. I wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself of the weight of Calvin's betrayal. But Calvin returned too quickly, all smiles and concern, carrying a tray like he was some devoted caregiver instead of a predator. "Becky, you know how he bruises these days. Blood thinners make everything worse," he said, sitting between us on the couch, controlling the conversation with practiced ease. But Rebecca wasn't fooled by his performance. Her trained eye took in details he thought he was hiding. The way I flinched when he moved too quickly, the locks on cabinets that should have been accessible to me, the subtle signs of isolation and control. When she hugged me goodbye, she whispered in my ear, "I'm going to help you, Dad. Trust me, we're going to get you out of this." After she left, Calvin's mask dropped completely. He shoved me back in my chair when I tried to walk to the bathroom alone, his hands rough and careless. "You're getting too comfortable," he snarled, his voice full of the rage he'd been hiding. "Remember who's in charge here, old man." I nodded meekly, but the camera caught it all. Every shove, every threat, every moment of his true cruelty was being preserved in digital amber. The breaking point came on a Friday night when Calvin brought friends over for poker, using my dining room table like it was his own personal casino. They were loud, drunk, and careless with their cigarettes, burning holes in Martha's hand-embroidered tablecloth while they laughed at crude jokes and counted their money. The smell of smoke and stale beer filled the air, making the house feel contaminated. When I politely asked them to be more careful with Martha's things, Calvin exploded like a bomb detonating in my living room. "Shut up, old man. This is my house now, and you're just a guest here." His voice carried across the room, silencing his friends momentarily. He grabbed my arm with both hands and dragged me to the guest room, his fingers digging into my flesh hard enough to leave finger-shaped bruises. Inside the small room, he shoved me onto the bed and pointed a finger at my face. "Stay in there until my friends leave," he commanded through gritted teeth, then turned the lock from the outside like I was some prisoner in my own home. I sat on the narrow bed for the next 4 hours, listening to them trash my home, break my things, and mock me through the thin walls. They broke one of Martha's china plates, the one from our wedding set, and laughed about the old fool locked up like a dog. But above my head, a tiny camera recorded everything through the crack under my door. Their faces, their voices, their casual cruelty. Calvin's friends became unwitting witnesses to his abuse, their identities clear enough for any jury to recognize. When he finally unlocked my door at midnight, reeking of alcohol and cigars, I was ready with my performance. Shaky, grateful, apologetic for causing trouble at his party. He bought every second of it. My lawyer, Patricia Wells, had handled my affairs for 20 years and knew me better than my own son did. When I called her office and whispered my situation in coded language we developed, she cleared her schedule immediately. "Dan, I'm coming over tomorrow, and I'm bringing a notary and a witness," she said grimly, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Calvin doesn't get to win this one. Not on my watch." She arrived the next afternoon with an official witness and quickly drew up documents that would protect my assets and establish Rebecca as my healthcare proxy, working with the efficiency of someone who'd handled similar cases before. We worked quietly in the basement while Calvin was out grocery shopping, signing papers by the light of a bare bulb that would make his forged documents worthless. Patricia also brought release forms for the security footage, making everything admissible in court should it come to that. "This is elder abuse, Dan. We're talking criminal charges here, not just civil court," she said, her pen moving quickly across legal papers. "When you're ready to end this nightmare, call me. I'll have the police there within an hour." She handed me copies of everything, sealed in an envelope marked with her law firm's letterhead. I hid the envelope in my toolbox with the other evidence, feeling like a general preparing for the final battle. Calvin thought he was hunting a helpless old man, but he was actually walking into an ambush 40 years in the making. The student was about to become the teacher, and class was almost in session. Calvin's greed reached new heights when he started selling my possessions behind my back, treating my home like his personal pawn shop. First, it was small things I might not notice immediately. My tools, my books, Martha's jewelry that he claimed was just sitting there collecting dust. Then he got bolder, advertising my furniture online and telling potential buyers I was downsizing for health reasons and needed quick sales. I watched from my chair as strangers carried away pieces of my life, paying Calvin cash he pocketed immediately while they loaded my memories into their trucks. When Rebecca noticed Martha's piano was gone, the one where she'd practiced for recitals as a little girl, Calvin claimed I'd agreed to donate it because the music was making me sad. Rebecca's face crumbled, knowing how much that piano meant to both her parents. But Calvin just shrugged like it was no big deal. But I squeezed her hand gently, letting her know this wasn't my choice, that I was keeping score of every theft. That night, Calvin celebrated his profits with expensive whiskey, getting drunk enough to brag about his smart investments to someone on the phone. "The old fool doesn't even know what's missing," he laughed, his voice slurred but clear enough for the recording devices. "By the time he figures it out, I'll have sold everything worth taking." I'd kept detailed records of every item he'd stolen, every dollar he'd pocketed, every piece of my life he'd converted to cash. When the time came, I'd make sure he paid back every penny, with interest that would cost him his freedom and his future. The insurance investigator arrived on a Wednesday morning, a sharp-eyed woman who introduced herself as Agent Parker and immediately commanded the room with her professional presence. Calvin tried his usual charm offensive, but she was all business, asking pointed questions about my accident and examining the staircase with the thoroughness of someone who'd seen every kind of fraud. The trajectory doesn't match a simple fall, she noted, taking photographs and measurements with scientific precision. These injuries suggest significant force was involved, possibly from another person. Calvin's face went pale, but he stuck to his story about my clumsiness and failing eyesight, his voice rising slightly with defensive anger. I played my part perfectly, acting confused when she asked direct questions, but I caught her eye once and nodded almost imperceptibly when Calvin wasn't looking. She understood, her expression shifting slightly to acknowledge the silent communication. After she left, Calvin was furious, pacing and muttering about nosy insurance companies and money-grubbing investigators who didn't understand family dynamics. He grabbed my shoulders and shook me roughly, his control finally slipping. "What did you tell her, old man? You better not have said anything stupid, because I'll make you regret it." The camera above us captured his violence and his implicit confession in the same frame, his face twisted with rage and fear. Agent Parker had given me her card before leaving, and I knew she'd be very interested in seeing that footage when the time was right to reveal everything. Rebecca's nursing supervisor was a woman named Joan who specialized in elder abuse cases, someone who'd seen every variation of family cruelty and knew how to recognize the signs. When Rebecca brought her by for what she called a social visit, I knew my daughter was building her own case against Calvin. Joan had kind eyes, but asked tough questions, examining my injuries with the professional concern of someone who documented evidence for a living. "Mr. Whitman, these bruises are in various stages of healing. That suggests ongoing trauma, not a single accident," she said, her voice gentle but clinical. Calvin interrupted constantly, trying to control the narrative and redirect attention to my supposed mental decline, but Joan was experienced in reading between the lines. She gave me a pamphlet about senior services, but hidden inside was a note with her personal number written in careful script. "Call anytime," it read, "day or night. You're not alone." That evening, Calvin's anger boiled over like water from an unwatched pot. He accused me of causing trouble and making him look bad to professionals who might interfere with his plans. His hand struck my face before I could duck, the slap echoing through the kitchen like a gunshot in the quiet house. But the camera caught everything, including his shocked expression when he realized what he'd done in full view of the recording device. "You made me do that," he said quickly, as if speaking directly to the recording. "You made me lose control with your lies and manipulations." Too late, Calvin. The evidence was already uploaded to the cloud, beyond your reach forever. My breaking point came when Calvin brought a woman home, introducing her as his girlfriend and installing her in my master bedroom like she was moving into her own house. Stephanie was half his age and twice as greedy, immediately cataloging my possessions with the practiced eye of someone who'd done this before. She took over my kitchen, threw away Martha's handwritten recipes that had been passed down through generations, and redecorated the living room with her tacky furniture from whatever cheap apartment she'd abandoned. When I protested quietly, suggesting maybe she could respect Martha's memory in her own home, Calvin backhanded me across the mouth, splitting my lip open. "This is Stephanie's house now," he announced, his voice full of casual cruelty. "You're lucky we let you stay here instead of dumping you in some state-run facility." Stephanie laughed, a sound like breaking glass, and suggested they could charge me rent for the guest room. Maybe take it out of my Social Security check. I dabbed blood from my lip with a tissue, but inside I was smiling through the pain. The camera had captured everything. The assault, the threat, the conspiracy to steal my home and charge me for the privilege of living there. I had enough evidence now to put Calvin away for years, but I wanted more. I wanted him to destroy himself so completely that he'd never recover, never be able to hurt another elderly person again. And judging by his increasingly reckless behavior, that day was coming soon. Stephanie proved to be Calvin's weakness and my secret weapon, a woman with no filter and even less sense. She was loud, demanding, and careless with information that should have been kept private. During her phone calls to friends, she bragged about living in a mansion she was about to inherit, describing my house and possessions in detail while I sat nearby, supposedly too senile to understand. She talked about Calvin's brilliant plan to get rid of the old fool and claim everything, laughing about how easy it was to manipulate someone my age. The cameras caught every word, every laugh, every casual admission of conspiracy against me. When she convinced Calvin to host a party to show off their new home, I knew I had them both exactly where I wanted them. 20 people came to celebrate in my stolen house, drinking my wine and eating off my dishes while I was locked in the guest room for my own safety during their festivities. But the security system recorded everything: the drugs being used in my living room, the destruction of my property, the conversations about when the old man finally croaks. Stephanie even posed for photos in Martha's jewelry, posting them online with captions about her new lifestyle and upgrade in living situation. By morning, I had enough evidence to file charges against both of them for conspiracy, elder abuse, theft, and drug possession. The trap was set with steel jaws, and all I needed was the perfect moment to spring it shut on both of them. That perfect moment came when Calvin and Stephanie decided to forge my signature on the house deed, thinking they were being clever by making their theft legal. They thought I was too medicated to notice, but I watched from my doorway as they practiced copying my handwriting at my own kitchen table like amateur criminals. Stephanie held the pen while Calvin guided her hand, both of them laughing about how easy it was to handle the paperwork for someone too senile to manage his own affairs. They used my notary stamp, stolen from my desk drawer, and even forged witness signatures with names they pulled from my address book. The camera above them captured every detail in high definition, including their faces as they celebrated what they thought was their victory over a helpless old man. "We did it," Stephanie squealed, kissing Calvin while waving the forged deed like a trophy. "The house is ours now. No more pretending to care about the old fool." Calvin popped a bottle of my good champagne, the one I'd been saving for Rebecca's wedding, and they toasted their successful fraud while the cameras rolled. They even took selfies with the forged documents, creating a perfect record of their crime for prosecutors to enjoy. I shuffled back to my room, smiling for the first time in months despite everything they'd put me through. They'd just handed me their prison sentences on a silver platter, recorded in 4K resolution for any jury to see. Tomorrow, I'd make the call that would end this nightmare forever and restore justice to my home. I waited until Calvin and Stephanie left for their celebration dinner before making the call that would change everything. "Patricia, it's time," I said simply, and within an hour my house was full of police officers, social workers, and legal officials who transformed my quiet home into a crime scene. Agent Parker from the insurance company arrived with a federal investigator, since Calvin had committed mail fraud by filing false claims about my accident. I sat in my chair, no longer playing the confused victim, and walked them through months of evidence with the clarity of someone who'd been planning this moment. The security footage played on my television like a crime documentary, showing Calvin's violence, Stephanie's greed, and their elaborate conspiracy to steal my home and possibly my life. Patricia had already filed restraining orders and criminal charges, while Rebecca documented my injuries with the professional photographs that would be used in court. When Calvin and Stephanie returned from dinner, drunk and gloating about their successful theft, they walked into a wall of badges and handcuffs waiting in my living room. "Daniel Whitman," Calvin snarled as the police read him his rights, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You'll regret this for the rest of your miserable life." I stood up slowly, no longer needing to pretend weakness, and looked him in the eye with 40 years of disappointment and newfound strength. "No, son," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the room. "You'll regret this. For the next 10 to 15 years in prison." The judge, it turned out, agreed with my assessment completely. The trial lasted 3 weeks, but the verdict was never in doubt from the moment the jury saw the first piece of evidence. Calvin and Stephanie's own words condemned them, recorded in crystal clear detail by the cameras they'd never suspected existed. The jury watched Calvin push me down the stairs, slap my face, steal my possessions, and forge my signature with the casual cruelty of someone who thought he was untouchable. They heard him threaten me, mock me, and plan my demise with the kind of calculation that made seasoned prosecutors shake their heads. Rebecca testified about my injuries, while Harold spoke about the psychological warfare Calvin had waged against his own father for months. Even Calvin's poker buddies testified reluctantly, admitting they'd witnessed him lock me in my room and abuse me in my own home while they drank my alcohol. The prosecutor called it one of the most clear-cut cases of elder abuse she'd ever seen, while the defense attorney could only plead for mercy that the evidence didn't support. Calvin got 15 years for multiple felonies, while Stephanie received 10 years as an accomplice and co-conspirator. As they were led away in chains, Calvin turned back one last time, his face desperate. "I'm still your son," he said, his voice breaking with something that might have been genuine emotion. I shook my head sadly, feeling the weight of years settling on my shoulders. "No," I replied quietly. "You stopped being my son when you pushed me down those stairs. Now you're just a stranger who hurt me." The courtroom was silent as the truth settled over everyone like a shroud. Rebuilding my life at 74 wasn't easy, but it was liberating. Rebecca moved in temporarily to help me recover, and slowly the house began to feel like home again. I replaced everything Calvin and Stephanie had stolen or destroyed, hanging Martha's pictures back on the walls and restoring her garden to its former beauty. The guest room became Rebecca's art studio, filled with paintings that brought color back to rooms that had been dark too long. Physical therapy helped my hip heal stronger than before, and counseling helped my heart process the betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. I kept one security camera active in the front hall, not from paranoia, but from practicality. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild, even trust in yourself. The evidence that had saved me was sealed away in Patricia's files, but I knew it would always be there if needed. Some battles you win, some battles you survive, and some battles change you forever. This had been all three. If you're reading this story, wondering if it's too late to fight back against someone who's hurting you, let me tell you something important. It's never too late, and you're never too weak. Calvin thought he was hunting a helpless old man, but he forgot that teachers spend their whole careers dealing with bullies, manipulators, and people who think they're smarter than everyone else. Age gave me patience, experience gave me wisdom, and technology gave me power. The cameras that recorded his crimes are available to anyone. The laws that protected me exist in every state, and the courage that saved my life lives inside every person who's ever been pushed too far. Don't let anyone tell you that family should be forgiven no matter what they do. Family should be forgiven when they deserve forgiveness, not when they demand it. Calvin learned that lesson in prison, where he'll stay until he's an old man himself. I learned it in my living room, where I sit now writing this story for anyone who needs to hear it. Justice isn't just for the young or strong or wealthy. Justice is for everyone brave enough to document the truth, speak up for themselves, and refuse to be anyone's victim. My name is Daniel Whitman. I'm 76 years old, and I won. My story spread through the community like wildfire, inspiring other elderly victims to speak up about their own abuse. I testified before the state legislature about elder protection laws, sharing my experience to help strengthen legal safeguards for seniors. The security company that had saved my life asked me to be a spokesperson, and I agreed, knowing that technology could protect others the way it had protected me. Harold started a support group for senior victims of family abuse, and I attended every meeting, offering hope to people who thought they were powerless. "You're never too old to fight back," I told them, "and you're never too alone to win." Rebecca finished her degree in elder law, inspired by my case to specialize in protecting seniors from predatory family members. Watching her fight for others healed something in me that Calvin had broken, proving that one child's betrayal couldn't destroy a parent's legacy. The house that had been my prison became my platform, a place where justice lived and hope flourished. 2 years later, I celebrated my 76th birthday surrounded by people who truly loved me. Rebecca's children, my grandchildren who barely remembered their Uncle Calvin, played in the yard where Martha had once planted roses. Friends from church, former students, and neighbors who had supported me through the trial filled my living room with laughter and genuine affection. Agent Parker stopped by with her family, still amazed by how the case had unfolded. Patricia brought champagne and legal papers. Calvin's early parole had been denied, and his appeals had been rejected. Justice had not only been served, but was being maintained. As the sun set through windows Calvin had once claimed as his own, I felt Martha's presence in the warm light, approving of the peace I'd fought to reclaim. The cameras were gone now, replaced by family photos and children's artwork. Security had given way to serenity, vigilance to victory. I was no longer a victim or a survivor. I was simply a man at home in his own house, surrounded by love that couldn't be stolen or sold. If you're reading this story, wondering if it's too late to fight back against someone who's hurting you, Let me tell you something important. It's never too late, and you're never too weak. Calvin thought he was hunting a helpless old man, but he forgot that teachers spend their whole careers dealing with bullies, manipulators, and people who think they're smarter than everyone else. Age gave me patience, experience gave me wisdom, and technology gave me power. The cameras that recorded his crimes are available to anyone. The laws that protected me exist in every state, and the courage that saved my life lives inside every person who's ever been pushed too far. Don't let anyone tell you that family should be forgiven no matter what they do. Family should be forgiven when they deserve forgiveness, not when they demand it. Calvin learned that lesson in prison, where he'll stay until he's an old man himself. I learned it in my living room, where I sit now writing this story for anyone who needs to hear it. Justice isn't just for the young or strong or wealthy. Justice is for everyone brave enough to document the truth, speak up for themselves, and refuse to be anyone's victim. My name is Daniel Whitman. I'm 76 years old, and I won.